All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our third webinar in our series, Navigating Academic Waters, Essential Skills to Thrive as a Student and Early Career Scientist. My name is Julia Masterman. I work for CUAHSI as the Science Education and Outreach Coordinator. And today we are joined by AGU H3S to put on this panel about conferences, Conference Crash Course, a guide to communicating your way to successful scientific meetings. I'll leave it to our colleagues at AGU H3S to introduce our speakers, but thank you everyone for joining us today. While everyone's getting settled, I'm gonna go through just some housekeeping news from CUAHSI that might be of interest. Firstly, I would encourage you to connect with us at on Twitter via the Slack channel that we have. A link to sign up for that will go in the chat box in a moment, as well as sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on all CUAHSI news. We also have a very exciting new workshop coming up. It's going to be our first virtual workshop where you can build your own stream sensor from home. This is a collaboration with the Opens Lab from Oregon State University. Registration deadline is July 9th, so after the holiday weekend, so I recommend you register sooner rather than later if you're interested. And more information on that can be found on the CUAHSI website. We also are asking for student advisors. We're looking for student volunteers to help us improve our water science data services, to participate in occasional user testing and surveys regarding CUAHSI data tools and services. It's a small commitment, but it can really help shape the future of how CUAHSI serves the community. So if you're interested, we recommend that you sign up during the link. I'll put that in the chat box in a moment, or contact my colleague Emily Clark at eclark@cuahsi.org. And if you've signed up for this in the past, Emily just told me today that she is going to be reaching out to you in the next couple days. And with that, I want to thank the AGU H3S professional development team, and I'm going to pass it off to them for this webinar. So Julia.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. Hi, everyone. It's great to see a good crowd here today. My name is Julia Guimond. I will be co-hosting today's webinar with Julianne Davis. I just finished my PhD at the University of Delaware, and this summer we'll be transitioning to an NSF postdoctoral fellowship at Dalhousie University. I am also H3S's vice chair. So you'll see me around for another year or so. Julianne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Julia. My name's Julianne Davis. I just finished my master's at Syracuse University, and now I'm going to be heading to UNC Chapel Hill this fall to start a PhD. I'm a first-year member of H3S, so I will probably be around for a couple more years as well. And thanks everyone for logging in today. It's great to have you here.
Great. Yeah. So in addition to Julianne and I, a whole bunch of people who you saw on the screen contributed to the development of this. So thank you to them. So without further ado, I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So let's go alphabetical order of last names. So Dr. Barnes, do you want to start and introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Becca Barnes, and I'm an associate professor of environmental science at Colorado College.
Hi, I'm Nandita Basu. I am an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering and earth and environmental sciences at University of Waterloo.
I'm Emily Fairfax. I'm an assistant professor at California State University, Channel Islands.
Great, thanks. So before we get started, I'll just say we have a whole bunch of questions to ask in the next 55 minutes or so, but if you as the audience have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible. All right, so we're sort of gonna go through from the pre-conference, conference to post-conference, and so I'll start off with the first question in terms of thinking about pre-conference and pre-conference preparation. And so, Emily, would you like to start? And the question is, when you were just starting out in your career, like many of us in this webinar today, how did you prepare for AGU, or did you prepare for AGU? Did you have any sort of pre-conference routine?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It has definitely changed every year I've gone to AGU. My first year, I was so panicked about getting it right that I was like rehearsing everything 24/7 and like working myself into this frenzy. I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been to a conference before. And I was like, I just gotta have it all memorized perfectly. And like my husband was so overhearing me say my like poster spiel, like, well, I'm walking down the hall while I'm cooking dinner. It's like, stop, you've got it. And it went fine. And then like every year after that, I've like eased up a little bit on the pre-anxiety. And most recently now I'll prepare by like going through and, you know, thinking about my presentation, but I spend a lot more time thinking about who I want to talk to now, instead of what I want to say, like who am I trying to connect with? And I found that to be both lower stress and a lot more useful.
Great. Does anybody else have anything to add?
Following up on that.
Oh, sorry, Nandita.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, I couldn't agree with everything Emily said more. And I mean, it's actually horrifying how little I prepare for my own presentations now. And I would say that like almost too much so. So, but I 100% agree that I get more out of planning who I want to talk to and what like that personal interaction with folks at conferences. And, you know, I think that you need to, it's especially AGU is so big that you need to have a plan in terms of like when you're going to meet some people. It doesn't have to all be spelled out, but I think that for me, it makes it feel a little bit better if I have a couple meetings with folks throughout the week and like have that already set up to begin with on top of, you know, the other commitments that I have during that week.
So I'll follow up a little bit on that, kind of on that note. I think when I started out, I would say I tried planning too much also. So keep in mind that it's going to be a crazy time. So focus on a few key people you want to meet, a few key things you want to do. And again, presenting your science is almost the thing that pays your bills to go there, nothing more than that. What you are really getting out of it is the interactions you have with people. So change that mindset in terms of what is important.
Okay, great. So this is sort of not more on the networking side. We'll get to that importance. This is thinking about how to actually get people to your talk. So is there anything that you do, whether it's keywords or catchy titles or pre-conference marketing, to make sure you have an audience or to get people to your talk?
So I love catchy titles. Titles are so much fun. Sometimes what we do in terms of scientific writing has to be siloed in a way that's appropriate. And I think conferences are easier in that way because you can get away with whatever title you want rather than in a paper where you make up a creative title and the reviewer comes back and say, no, that is taking too much of a leeway. You can't do that, right? So this is your space to be really, really creative and really, really fun in terms of title to really draw attention of people in. And it's fun doing it. I think Becca was.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't disagree with Nandita at all. And it's especially compared to like the titles of our papers. But I do think that sometimes folks go too far on humor. And I think especially because we're an international community, it's really important if you're US based to remember that some of the jokes you make, I mean, let's leave aside the inappropriate ones because no one's going to do that, right? But like if there is any, right, quite frankly, there's a lot of sexualization in the geosciences. And so please do not do that. And then also remember that this is an international audience. And so like idioms and sayings that may be US centric may not translate well. So you don't want to go too far into I don't even know what to call it, in that direction. The only other thing I would say is like with keywords versus the abstract, right? People are gonna search for things. I rarely read abstracts at conferences, right? I'm searching for keywords that I'm interested in. So if I'm presenting on my research, the word nitrate might be in my abstract 4 times, but I never use the word nitrogen. And therefore I would put nitrogen as a keyword, right? So think about the words that you search for and, you know, like how will that help people find it? I may be alone and not reading a lot of abstracts, but there's so many that I'm mostly just looking at titles until it comes down to like, oh, I'm so excited about 2 things and I'm trying to figure out which to go to.
Yeah, I would follow up and say that at least for my field of research, which is beaver dams, I kind of have to be aggressive in making my own jokes before everyone else makes the jokes for me. And then they do toe into that land where it's like, it's not funny. I don't like that joke. And so I usually make some joke with the word damn in my title because like, even though I don't try to, it's going to sound like it. So I might as well try. And then like I do tend to add a lot of keywords in there, and my keywords actually tend to be more on the technical side since my titles tend to be a little bit less on the technical side. So I'll have like damned if you do is my title, and then in my keywords I'll have like evapotranspiration, NDVI, metric model, like all the things where like the people who are interested in the science will come, and then the people who want to hear about beavers, they'll catch me with the title, and that's their spot.
Am I wrong in thinking that the search function on the conference proceedings searches abstracts, titles, and keywords? I think it does that, right?
Yeah, it does.
I believe
okay.
So, yeah.
I was like, my God, my strategy is completely wrong if that's not happening.
So this is actually a question from the audience, and they're wondering if Twitter is an effective way to promote your talk or your poster before the conference.
A resounding yes.
And use hashtags. I found I was very shy about using hashtags when I started on Twitter because I was like, oh, it's going to come across like I'm a poser. I don't know what I'm doing. But I just turn like keywords into hashtags. So I put a hashtag before beaver every time I tweet about it. And I put a hashtag before like wildfire. Because then when people are searching, they'll be searching, like I search AGU wildfire to try to find people promoting their wildfire talks. So I'm trying to mimic what I'm seeing to drive that traffic back to me as well. And then, I mean, it always helps to have people in your network who have larger followings tweeting stuff back out. I'm sure we'll get to that in networking, but there was a study that just came out recently about paper citations related to tweets. And if they get tweeted more, they get cited more. And that's like both terrifying and like kind of powerful. And I'm not sure how to feel about it, but it is.
All right. And I will say AGU H3S will retweet you, early career scientists, before the conference. Definitely. And so we know AGU, the call for abstracts is open. And so a lot of students are thinking about writing these abstracts, but it's months and months away and may not have results. So this is more about the question of writing abstracts. And do you have any strategies or techniques for writing an abstract when you don't necessarily have the results, but are thinking that you'll have more? And how do you still get people to come and make it sound interesting without sort of those big numbers that really catch people's attention?
I'll jump in.
I'll
say don't worry too much about it. Yeah, like Becca said, there's only small number of abstracts you end up reading anyway, right? If you don't have results, say this study has potential implications in these areas, right? So abstract is really a small piece of the story. It's necessary, but it's not the most important thing that strikes out to people.
I think the only thing is that your abstract is what the conference conveners see, and they are, I certainly hope, they are reading them carefully. And so I very rarely write abstracts having results. So I would say that it's important to focus on your why and the story, right? Which you often have. And then you can talk about, I'm very forthcoming. I'm like, like preliminary results will be presented. I mean, that's very clear. I have no data, and I'm just saying that it will exist in a couple months, right? But I think that also translates to your presentations, right? It's really important at such a big conference with such broad disciplinary expertise to really focus on the why of what you're doing anyway, right? And make sure that you're talking about like why your stuff is important, because it's very likely you're not talking to someone who's using exactly the same methods as you, or is, right? Like, they searched wildfire and got to me and Emily, right? They want the beavers, and then they're at my talk and I'm talking about carbon. They're like, I don't care, right? So I think that, you know, it's important to just remember that, like, to give that sort of preamble.
Yeah, I've only written one abstract where I had full results ready to go for it. And I do what Nandita and Becca said is like, this is what I'm interested in, this is how I'm approaching it, and we're all gonna see what it is in December.
Great, that's really helpful. So now we'll switch over, and I'm actually gonna pass the hosting off to Julianne, and we'll talk more about conferences and networking and the really great stuff.
Great, thanks, Julia. So now we're gonna switch into talking about the questions that we all have about what we do at the conference. During our conversations as H3S, but thinking about this webinar, we talked a lot about who we try to network with at conferences, whether it's big names, established researchers, or people at the same career stage as us. Do you have thoughts on this, how to prioritize networking and balance those two different types of networking? And if so, do you apply different strategies to those two different types of networking, depending on who you're trying to talk to?
I can start. So
I can
I
start
would
this one.
So I would say that while I did not think this at the time, I think networking with folks at your same career stage is probably more important, because they are the people that you're going through science with. And I cannot speak highly enough about my, like, what I refer to as my conference friends, two of whom are the other panelists, right? Like right? I mean, it's just like you meet people, and then, you know, and I think that most of my strongest relationships that I've made at conferences are based on personal interactions that have little to do with our science, except for the fact that we both like watersheds or something, right? And so I think that for me, that was really helpful in terms of building confidence. When I was a grad student, I often would pick one or two quote unquote famous people, those people's papers that were, you know, that were dog-eared, and I really wanted to meet them. And if they had a poster, I would strategize and I'd go to their poster. I always brought a friend with me, and we would swap. So that way, if they blow you off, which sometimes happens because it's AGU, or maybe they're a jerk, right? Then you have your friend and you're like, okay, let's go find your person, right? And I think that, that's what I did. I mean, I don't really love the phrase wingman, but I think that, or wing person, but I do think that it's really helpful to have one, whether it's they don't need to be your best friend, right? Like, they can be someone you know, or you meet the first night at the early career mixer. So I would say definitely take advantage of those mixers, because people are going there to meet people, right? So if you see someone who is alone, you can go talk to them and be like, I'm also alone. What do you do, right? And I mean, we're all like kind of in that awkward science category, right? In terms of social skills. And so I really think people are very forgiving in those spaces about like sort of the approach. And so without a doubt, my life was made so much better by being invited to the Earth Science Women's Network reception, like my second or third AGU. And I mean, eventually I became a board member, and I'm no longer, but like that network, though, and like whether it's, you know, sometimes like the hydro group has a happy hour, right? Just like look out for those things. And if you aren't seeing them, ask your advisor, right? Or ask other people, right? And now we have Twitter, which makes me just sound so old, but so much of this stuff is like advertised on Twitter, so you can see it even if you can't navigate your way through the AGU website, which is sometimes impenetrable, for me at least.
Yeah,
So
I would
go ahead.
I would add on to that how I network depends a lot on like the scale of my field that I'm thinking about. So if I'm trying to network with hydrologists, I'm not going to walk up to like the hydrologist at AGU. I don't like want to do that. I don't feel comfortable with that. But if it's like the eco-hydrologist, I might. If it's the beaver person, like, you know, I'm going to run right up to them and be like, oh my God, let me tell you about this beaver I saw. Because like, I know that's how they're going to want to talk with me. And like all the different levels and like subgroups and like cultures within science are different. And I have friends who are in other realms of hydrology, and even in their really specific subfields, like that's not how people really interact with each other. And you don't know that until you like find your way in. So when I first started talking to these people, I had no idea like how formal should I be, like how intense. And I felt very lucky because who I considered to be like the beaver person, she came to my first talk and she came up to me afterwards and was like, that was really cool. I like beavers too. Let me tell you about this one I saw in a pond. And I was like, oh my God, is this how we talk to each other? This is great. Tried it with someone outside that subfield, doesn't work the same way. So lots of like guess and check, see how people want to be talked to. If there is sort of like a defined power structure with seniority in the field. I think the beaver group is so small that you don't really feel that as much as you would in necessarily like hydrology as a whole.
So following up on that, I feel that when I first entered, my first AGU was as a postdoc. So I did not go to AGU as a graduate student. And I was completely overwhelmed because I was also at the same time switching areas. So I didn't know anybody in this new area in watersheds that I was wanting to work in. And I was there and I remember feeling really, really depressed because I did not have a community and everybody seemed to know everybody. And it seemed to be like this group everybody belonged to and they had friends and I didn't have any friends. And I am an introvert. So for me to go up and interact with a person takes a lot of energy. And then I'm exhausted after 3 of such conversations. But one of the things that was advised to me, and I've stuck to it, is select one conference and be a regular there. And I selected AGU to be the conference. And I've been going there for the last 12 years. What that means is that my 5-year-old has been to AGU thrice now. And it is challenging. It is challenging at times, but having stuck to it, I've over time found my people, and with a mix of, I would say, peer communication, peer networking, and sometimes finding. So I would do like 1 or 2 big names each year, and that would take a lot out of me because it would require about thinking about their work. Should I say this? Would that sound dumb or things like that? And really strategizing. So that would take up a lot of energy. And then as the peer network grew stronger, having fun, like Becca was saying, meeting people that I haven't seen for a year. Over the last 12 years, it went from being intimidating and stressful to being really fun. So if you're there feeling stressed about it, know that it'll get better.
Thank you all. Those are some really great insights. And to kind of tag on what Becca said, H3S every year has a couple early career networking events, so keep an eye out for those. We'll still be having them in a virtual format, so check your email or hop on Twitter. Our next question follows really nicely with what Nandita was saying. For first-time conference attendees who don't yet have an established network, what tips would you recommend taking to prepare for a conference? So Nandita, you just addressed that. If you have anything else you'd like to.
No. So that's pretty much. I mean, Becca said find the social events and find 1 or 2 people. I know it's hard, and give yourself a break if you're feeling bad about it.
I found the student lounge is a good hiding spot for people that are also feeling like they don't have a network or someone to talk to, and it has coffee and like outlets that aren't taken all the time. So I would go there if I was like, I've been standing alone for too long, it feels awkward now, I need to go somewhere where I'm like with my people. I didn't have people yet, like student lounge, because everyone's on the couch, everyone wants their quiet time, but you're surrounded with people, so it kind of helps push that feeling of being alone away.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add other than the fact that like you should have zero like negative thoughts about taking a break from AGU. Like, and I encourage, I mean, this gets to a later question, but I encourage my students to take if they're planning on being there the whole week, to take essentially one day off. Like at least it maybe it's not one day, but like spread out over the week, because it's just, I mean, as an extreme extrovert, AGU is overwhelming to me. Right. I mean, it's like, you know, and so I think that it's important to just like listen to yourself. And if you're exhausted, you're not going to have fun. And it can be fun. It's going to be stressful, but it can also be fun. And I also had the very positive experience similar to Emily, where I had, you know, the isotope goddess come up to my poster my first year. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, I couldn't speak. I mean, my PhD advisor still makes fun of me, but I mean, I completely froze. I was like, like her name was all over my poster, like, you know, and so I just think that, but you know, I mean, it's also important, like, remember that when you're interacting with other people, we're all just nervous often because this is like our work, and like, just be gracious. And I think that the vast majority of folks are that way. So.
Thank you. Those are some really good suggestions. Next question, what methods have you employed, either in person or online, to get more people to come to your poster or presentation? We touched on Twitter earlier, and someone in the chat wanted to know if there are other social media channels you recommend. And I'm also hoping you could touch on how this might change now that AGU is online this year.
I mean, I guess we were talking, I was like, didn't we have this conversation? But it was before we started recording. So I, until maybe a year or two ago, never promoted my talks on social media, and I still only use Twitter. But I do, as we were talking about before the recording started, I do like talk about the fact that it's happening in the future to folks that I meet, right? Or that I see. And I'm like, oh yeah, my poster or my student's poster or my talk or my student's talk is happening this time. You should really come, like, this is why. And at this point in my career, I definitely do that for my students way more than for myself. And so I think that's also important because, you know, so I was my PhD advisor's first student, right? I call myself the burnt pancake, but like, and no criticism of him, like, I needed to tell him, like, can you do this for me? Because, you know, it's just like, it didn't occur to him, right? And I think that it's okay to ask folks that are sort of have a greater network or a larger network, right, to help promote you, right? And I mean, I think there's a lot of us on Twitter that are willing to do that, right? You can, and I don't know, I've never used like Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook to like promote my talks. I'm guessing you could do that on Snapchat, TikTok, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. I think that it just depends on where you talk about science. I talk about science on Twitter, so in social media. So that's where I would promote it from a social media perspective. And I would guess it's going to increase this year given the virtualness.
So to add one other thing to that, so one of the things, and I think I was talking about it before we started is one of the other things that I found other students have done, and I've recognized it as an interesting tactic in terms of getting people to your talk, is by really finding the people that you think will be interested in your work and sending them an email, right? And when that personal email pops up with time and the poster number of your poster, the chances that they will stop by is much, much greater. And the other thing that I will say with Twitter or anything that you use, promote other people's talks, right? So create that community by promoting each other's talks, and that will create that space for all of us to be there.
Awesome. So now, Becca, you touched on like how you help your students at conferences. So the next question we have is, as an early career faculty going to conferences and taking your students or your mentees, what's your advice that you give to them? How do you make sure your students feel included and have a successful meeting? And how do you do that in person, like we've had historically? And then what are you thinking about for this year with AGU going online? How might that be different for you?
Yeah, so what I'm going to say is very much about in-person, but I think a lot of it translates to, well, it could definitely be done in this format in terms of the conversation with your students. And I'm hoping that some of the challenges that I'm about to talk about will be minimized in a virtual setting, but I don't know if that's true. So for those of you who don't know, I work a lot on issues of sexual harassment and bullying and other crappy things that happen in our field. And so my students get a very uncomfortable talk before we go to conferences. And when I say uncomfortable, they're typically like kind of squirming in their seats, and I don't know if they're listening, but I'm sure they're nodding along. And they don't want to hear it, and I didn't want to hear it either. No one told me that, but it is so important to me that when someone says something like, that's good work for a woman, that my student knows that that is their problem and not her problem. And she also knows to come to me immediately and tell me what that asshole, excuse me, just said to her, right? Because I want to make sure that she knows that this has nothing to do with her, right? And so I think that that is super important. And I have talked to so many of my colleagues who are shocked that this still goes on. But as a woman who doesn't look my age and has blonde hair, it happens to me every year at AGU. Every single year. It happens to me or my students or both. And I just think that it is so critical that we talk about these things with our students so that they know that once again, it's not their fault, and also so that they report it. Because if we don't report these things, we aren't gonna get these harassers out of AGU. AGU now has an amazing program, AGU Safe, that is a way to report, a way to figure out how the stuff is going on. But aside from that, I also practice the spiels with them, right? So we practice a 1-minute spiel for their poster. We also practice a 5-minute spiel for their poster. I only have undergrads, not to minimize them by saying only, but I only have undergrads. And so for them, they are really, it's all their first time going to a conference. And so I think it's really important for them to feel confident in answering questions. And so I make sure that they're in that space. When we're at the conference, I usually am very explicit about the fact that they should not be with me all the time for both their sake and my sake. But we do have planned things throughout the week where we're checking in, and I ask them ahead of time, who do you want to meet at this conference? I will do my best to make that happen. Right? So I try to do the things that I wanted my advisor to do, when I was a student, right? So, but I do think, not to harp on the topic, I do think it's really important that we talk to our students about the crap that happens at conferences, especially if we continue to have alcohol at poster sessions, which, that would be a coup if we could get rid of that.
I have found that with, so I've personally brought one student to a conference that was far away before, and then I have also worked preparing undergraduates to go to their first conferences. And some of the things that I've found were really helpful is talking through the logistics, really explicitly, you're going to float this much money. Can you float this much money? Do you need someone else to float it for you? You need to book a hotel. Have you found someone to share a room with? It's going to be expensive if you don't. Here's how you because it can be really, really stressful if you've never done it before. Booking travel is already stressful, especially if you don't know what you're getting into. And then the other thing that I do, especially for students with posters, is simulate the awkward moments of poster sessions. So where somebody will walk up, look at your poster, look at you, and then leave. And the first time that happened to me, I was like, I have a terrible poster. Nobody wants to see this. I didn't realize people just do these drive-bys. Half the time they're not actually trying to look at posters. They're trying to center themselves, and they just walk through the poster hall. And I didn't know that, so it was stressful. So I try to prepare students and tell you this is going to happen. You're going to get people who walk by, look at you, and then keep walking. You'll get ones that walk, stop, look at you, and keep walking. You'll get ones that look like they're about to ask a question, and then they leave. Don't overinterpret anything. Everyone's in their own mind space, and you never know why they're stopping. They might be just in a hurry and trying to remember oh, I have to come back to this one. There's just so many of those little things that seem rude and offensive that I don't think always are. And so preparing people to don't get upset right away, because I know that's something that happened to me and I was upset. It would have been good to have a little more mentorship on that one.
Cool. I really appreciated both your comments, Becca, the thing that you were talking about in terms of preparing students for harassment, that really rings true a lot. So probably the only other thing that I would say, one of the things that I've always advised students to do is sometimes I feel that they want to meet somebody and I'm talking to someone, but they're too shy to come and interrupt me. And I always encourage them, you just have to let go of the I'm disturbing them and come over, because if I see them around, I will pull them in and introduce them to somebody or the other. But if I don't, I can't. So use me effectively. Is one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give to the students. And the other being that in terms of lunches and dinners, break it up into things that you can kind of do it with your friends and low key, but force yourself to do at least one or two that are networking with people that you don't know, that really push those boundaries, because sometimes you do form really important connections through things like that.
Just to like add on a tiny bit, because I really appreciated what Emily said. That was really important. And then what Nandita said, I think it's really important to prepare your students just for the AGU experience. And the fact that like, as you move on in your career, i.e. your advisor, like I'm running workshops, I'm doing this, right? And I think it's really important for them to know when I am and am not available, right? And that I want them to interrupt me, like what Nandita's saying, right? So I think just everything you can do to try to like make that overwhelming experience a little bit less overwhelming, right? I try to figure out a way for me to pay for their travel, all of these things, because, you know, my students, you know, I mean, I barely feel like I can float the money, right? Let alone, but thankfully if I have a grant, I can do it. But I think that just remember, I don't know, I just always try to remember the first time I went to AGU and like all of the things that were like, oh my God, about it, and try to prepare students for that, because you can't prepare yourself for 28,000 people. I mean, at least I can't. I mean, that's insane. Sorry for the ableist language.
I think that's a really important point, and I love hearing how you all are so proactive with communicating with your students. I mean, AGU is overwhelming even if you've been going for several years. So I think these are all things that we can think about, no matter if this is going to be our first conference or our fifth. Our next question is about being on the job hunt. How do you approach conferences differently if you're actively looking for a job? Or do you approach conferences differently if you're on the job hunt?
Well, this was me last year, so it's very recent memory for me. I did approach them differently. I went to more conferences than I normally would. And I did reach out to like search committee chairs and ask, like, can I talk to you? Do you want to like sit down for coffee sometime? I can come find you, like trying to make it easy. A lot of them did take me up on it and they're like, yeah, let's talk. And through those conversations, like I found out some jobs, like I actually was not what they were looking for expertise wise. And these applications can be such huge burdens to assemble that like, if I know that's not going to be the fit that they want, and I'm not like, I have to get this job, like, I'll stop. Like, I'll focus on the jobs that are more in line with what I want. Like if I roll up and they're like, actually, we were looking for a lab chemist, like there's no way I can swing myself as a lab chemist. So like I got satellites and that's it. And I think it was good. It was definitely more stressful. I carried a lot more stuff in my bag, ready to go, like little mini versions of my CV, and like I made sure my business cards were on point and had my website like really up to date before I went, so that I could immediately send people to look at things if they were asking. One thing I did, which I got mostly positive reception on, was like I have a Google Cardboard headset, and I would talk about my field sites a lot. And so sometimes people are like, I don't know where that is. I don't know what a beaver pond is. And I could show them in like a little VR headset. I was looking at jobs that were very undergrad focused and very like hands-on education focused. So I think that was a good decision and like a good tool for me to use in networking. I don't know how well that would fly if you were trying to apply for a very research intense job where like the outreach component isn't necessarily, you know, that stellar home run they want to see. They want to see like your list of publications. But it was fun. I tried to keep it very true to myself because the job search was so overwhelming and stressful, and I kept wanting to get a job so bad, but I had to remember, like, if I'm not myself and I get hired into a job for not me, like I'm gonna hate that job. So it's better for me to go and like bring out my Google Cardboards and talk about beavers too much and have them still like me than do like try to keep it really muted, get into a job and not like it. So it was hard because I had to really like almost turn off some of the like professional Emily conference things and keep it like, this is who I would be in a job when I talk to you.
So in terms of transitions, maybe from career stages, right? So master's, you're looking for a PhD, or PhD, you're looking for a postdoc. I think conferences are a really, really good way to find those positions, because a lot of times those positions are not explicitly advertised. So even if there is no ad that you have seen, you can reach out to people that you would really love to work with, invite them to your posters and say, by the way, I'll be graduating next year. If you have something coming up, please let me know. I've had people that I have recruited through that path. So it's a really powerful tool for that postdoc or that PhD that is your heart's desire and you don't know how to get it.
Just to add on a tiny bit, yeah, I would say that in addition, right, the folks that I postdoc, my first postdoc, I met them at AGU. They were my advisors, you know, larger group. And I mean, admittedly, we were like drinking whiskey together or something, but we started talking about science, and then I wrote a proposal with them, right? And so it wasn't, I think that there's a lot of ways to get into a postdoc, but I think those interactions, right? Just like, I think what Emily's saying is so true. Like, you need to be yourself. And I'm very impressed by the VR beaver thing. Like, that's amazing. But I definitely was never that organized, but I do think that you can reach out to folks at that school or in that department, even if they're not on the search committee, because that can also give you information about if it's a teaching position or a research position or something. I would also reach out, like, just in terms of searching for jobs, you should talk to as many people who interact with those humans as possible, because regardless of how much we love the science that said person is doing or said school is doing, right, we're all people, and we need to work with people who respect us and treat us well. And like, that is something that's hard to discern from websites. I mean, sort of on purpose, right? So.
Following up on all of those great suggestions, with AGU being online this year, what should we do to prepare for job hunting at a virtual conference?
Get your websites in order. I'm always like impressed and horrified watching the stats on my website around when I give talks and seeing how many visitors I get. Bypasses all my nice, beautiful pages and goes straight to the CV. And I'm like, of course, this is what you want. And I mean, just make sure that it's presenting yourself as you want it to be seen. People will visit it, people go straight to your CV. There's pages nobody's looked at on my website, which is sad, but you know, watch that kind of traffic if you haven't looked at it already, see where they're going, and make sure those pages are ready for, you know, the head of NSF to come clicking away at. You want those to be spotless. And being online, people aren't going to be able to walk up to you and start talking. They're going to start with your online presence.
And perhaps maybe, I mean, I haven't done, I mean, so Society of Freshwater Sciences is sort of happening like in an extended version. So that's sort of my only online conference experience so far. And I really appreciate how they've like sort of de-densified it. And because it makes it far more manageable for me. But I think, we all might have to be a little bit more deliberate, right? And, you know, email the folks that you want to come to your poster or that you want to come to your talk, right? And be like, you know, in this time of COVID, like, I would love to talk to you about it afterwards, right? And it also, you know, in some ways is like both, I can imagine it'll be good and bad, that it's going to expand the time in which we're talking about the science at AGU, right? And so you don't have to follow up that day. And I was going to say this anyway, right? AGU, for those of us in, right, it's often right before the holidays, and there's like, whether you celebrate those holidays or not, right, school and a lot of things shut down. And so sometimes the follow-up email is better, like in January, right? If you are asking for something substantive, right? If you're just saying, oh my gosh, it was so great to meet you, hope to see you again, right? You can send that sort of, you know, the same time, right? But I think, but but I'm a big encourager of follow-up emails. Everyone likes to hear that you enjoyed meeting them, right? No one's going to be sad about that, right? So, and if you want something from someone, you must ask for it. So back to Nandita's point, like if her students don't ask her, like she might not notice them. It's not because she doesn't like them. It's just because, well, there's 28,000 people there. So, right. So I think it's just really important for us all, right, to realize what we need and like how to ask for it obviously in a nice way, but I respond way faster to emails that are very direct. Like, do you have that paper? Would you be willing to help me on this? Would you be right? As opposed to like, oh, it was great meeting you. I hope to talk to you again. I'm like, that's great, right? Like, but I don't know what I can give them or how I can help them professionally because they haven't told me, right? And so I just think it's important to not be shy about asking, which is hard. I'm not going to say that that's easy. So but maybe it'll be a little bit easier for introverted humans, which I know many humans are, in an email format, right? Because you don't have to worry about that face-to-face. I'm not sure, like I find it actually more awkward in email, right? Because I'm me. So, but I think that you just have to ask.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more, Becca. You just have to ask. And sometimes when at least this happens to me, I think about asking, my immediate next thought is, oh no, I'll be bothering that person. And over time, I've learned to tell myself as the next thought, this is your thought and this is not the right path to go. And I would correct myself automatically. I still can't prevent that from happening, but I can at least correct myself. So ask. Everybody's happy when somebody asks because it makes it so much easier, that specific thing, right? The other, in terms of networking in virtual conferences, I really don't have an idea. I think it's something that will be challenging. I've done a little bit with EGU and a little bit with SFS, but I still find it a lot of challenging. One thing that I would suggest maybe is find some posters that you are interested in and go network there, right? So you can't have people come to yours necessarily, except through Twitter, etc. Go to others.
I think those are all really great tips, and especially because we're all navigating online conferences for the first time, I think everybody's going to probably be trying to figure out what it means to be looking for someone to hire as well. A question that we had and that was echoed in the chat is, what should we do to stick in people's memories after the conference is over? Does using business cards help with that? Do you have any other suggestions about how to really make sure someone remembers you?
So I lose business cards. I would say, and this is not easy and not always possible, right? But if you have a really insightful question about their work, if you have been able to, so that's one thing that does stick. If somehow or the other somebody asks you a question that totally wows you, and I'm like, I hadn't thought about it before, that's definitely stick. I mean, I'm saying that, but it's not easy. But sometimes I've seen students have that question but be afraid to ask. Right? So don't be afraid. So questions and things like that do stick to people. And then following up in January timeframe when everybody's come back, and just even if you don't have anything specific, you could still say, I enjoyed your talk. And that's a way to keep a conversation going.
And if you ask that insightful question, it's awesome to remind them of that, right? Because I think I was going to say follow up, but then make sure that they know who you are, right? Because, right, we all just met a whole bunch of people, right? And like, I love the idea of business cards. Also, sometimes people make tiny posters. I've seen that all, but I will fully admit that like, I often have this pile of stuff and then I'm like, what do I do with it? Right? And so I think it's good because you're like, there's something in addition to your name or something that they're taking with them, especially if you're doing a poster and have the mini poster. But I don't think that you should ever be ashamed for reminding someone who you are, right? And being like, oh, right, like we met at my poster on this. We talked about this. I would be interested in X, or it was great talking to you, right? And so all of that will help reinforce the memory of you in their brain.
I have business cards, and on the back of them, I got printed old like historic trapper journal drawing of beaver dams. It cost extra, like $10 extra, but it was something where I could flip it around and be like, wow, remember all these beaver dams? And then there's my name. And it was on that one piece of paper. And I think that helped enough because especially when I was just starting out in my PhD, I didn't feel like I had anything to really show off to be memorable, but I had a good visual. And I was like, at least you can remember that I thought to put a picture of a beaver dam. Obviously, that can be a lot harder to do if you study something like an isotope. Like, I don't know, I'm sure there's cool ways to visualize an isotope. I don't know them. So you might have to get a little bit creative with that. The other thing I do is I always ask people, do you want to take a picture of my name tag? Because people flick through their phone pictures a lot. And sometimes they'll be flicking through looking for something back in like 6 months ago, and then they see your tag and they're like, oh crap, I was supposed to email her. And I have gotten emails that are like, hey, I just remembered that I was supposed to email you. I saw your picture in my phone. As long as you're fine with that, like it does have a good amount of information on it. You can like put your thumb over the QR code or whatever. But then people will take it, or I'll put it up next to my poster, or I'll smile by it all cheesy. But then at least it's on their phone already. It's already digital, and it's not in their emails that get swamped when you're at AGU. Like hundreds come in per day and it's overwhelming. It's in the photos. So it's something they'll see again, and it's kind of an active effort to delete it.
That's a great tip. I've always taken pictures of posters, but never thought to take a picture of a name tag or have someone do that. So that's
a really cool idea. I've never thought about it too, Emily. Thank you.
So we're going to switch now into thinking what happens after the conference. How do you maintain relationships post-conference? For example, if you're a fourth-year PhD student, you're going to be graduating soon, how do you stay in touch with a potential future advisor? And similarly, when is it appropriate to reach out to potential collaborators that expressed interest in working with you after that meeting?
As soon as you can. And of course you would have to, so let's say you met somebody and they have something and there's a potential of working together. If you can spare the time in your PhD to add another extra project in that mode, which is not always possible, but even if there is a space for that, reach out to them immediately and think about it. If it's a potential advisor, like Becca was talking about, can you write a proposal, right? They might not have funding right now. Can you figure out a way to write a proposal with them? And then this is the other piece also about going to the same conference and again. So a lot of people, over time, you develop that bond. First time, second time, it's not really there, but over the years, that connection gets deeper.
I also like to send a quick email, like in the moment during AGU, like, wow, it was great to meet you. I really like talking about this. I will email you again early January to follow up. Because then I'm saying like, I will maintain this like contact line. And I want to let you know that like, I'm interested in you, but I'm also recognizing that it's the holidays and the AGU's out of control and everyone's stressed. And like, honestly, if we're not all sick, we're going to be sleeping at the end of this conference anyways. So like January, I'll follow up, but I do like you. Like, I don't want to leave them hanging because I'm not wanting to, and I don't want that to happen. So a short follow-up and then like,
one other thing that came to my mind in this context, the one thing that I've found is the people on the panel, you know this already, get involved in committees. Student committees, any of the technical committees that exist are always looking for student volunteers in the different technical committees. Get into these places because that's a space for you to interact with people where they all have the time, they're all sitting down in a room and talking to you.
And sometimes there's a lot of sort of smaller conferences, not to like bash AGU, because I am 100% with Nandita on this. Like, it's good to have one that you go to, and AGU is mine. But I would say that, especially as an early career person, things like Gordon conferences or SFS or something that was much small, and it was NABS then, something that's much smaller was easier for me to navigate. And then I could parlay those relationships into the bigger space. So, I mean, Nandita and I are a perfect example. Like, maybe I met her at AGU, but
yeah.
memory of
Memories.
meeting Nandita is in a smaller setting where there was 100 of us, not 28,000, right? And, you know, we call it watershed camp, but like, you know, I think that if you have the capacity, which also means, right, like all of this stuff, like the reality is it's all easier if you have money, right? So like not only is writing proposals with potential advisors good practice and potentially a source of money, but like apply for everything. Apply for travel grants, apply for $100 or not maybe $100, but like $500 or something, right? Because unfortunately, people like to fund people who have already been funded. And so even those smaller pots of money can really help you. And if you have additional funding, then you can go to more of these things, right? Plus it makes you more marketable. So it's sort of a win-win and you're practicing your communication skills. So I just think that it's important to apply to things. And then there's often workshops associated with AGU that are hydro focused, or sometimes they're professional development workshops. I find that those are also great places to meet people because it's also like a smaller setting and you're just like sitting next to someone and you're like, oh, I can introduce myself. So I think it's also wrong to assume that you have to have a shared scientific interest to have those humans help you and for you to help them. I actually think that one of the reasons I love AGU is I get to see my friends who are paleontologists. I get to see, and I can go to a talk on Mars, right? You know, I mean, so I think that, you know, it's important to remember that your peer network doesn't have to only be hydrologist or biogeochemist or beaver humans. It can be, right? It can be planetary scientists and sedimentologists. All of these people can really help you in almost every aspect of your career, maybe not on the technical details of your research, but all of the other parts, which are the parts that we're not taught by our advisor or by our PhD or our master's, those are things that we're gaining sort of osmotically from our colleagues, right? And so there's no reason to not learn from other disciplines.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions. So I want to remind everybody that there is a CUAHSI Slack channel. The link is in the chat. So ask your questions there. We can do some follow-up. And now I'm gonna turn it back to Julia Masterman with CUAHSI.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much to our incredible panelists for sharing your expertise and experiences. This series has been an incredible opportunity, I think, for graduate students and early career folks to really kind of learn what Becca was just saying is some of the unwritten rules that you're not necessarily taught in a classroom, but are really necessary. So I really appreciate your participation in this series. I also want to thank the AGU H3S professional development team for helping coordinate and organize and put together this series. They're doing really incredible work through this series, and also definitely check out their website and follow them on Twitter for more opportunities. Just one more time, connect with CUAHSI, join the Slack via the link in the chat, follow us on Twitter, sign up for our newsletter, and see our website for more information. And again, H3S is providing opportunities for students and early career scientists to share their research with the hydrology community. Check out their website for more opportunities. And if you're interested in being featured by AGU H3S, I think Julie already mentioned that they will retweet you and are happy to highlight your work or shoot them an email to that end as well. Thank you again, everyone, for participating in this webinar, and have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.
Take care.
Take care.